I knew something was wrong the moment he ordered water. Not because water itself was dangerous. I'd been serving at Cassian's for 3 years, and people ordered water all the time. But this man didn't order water the way normal people did. He didn't glance at the menu, didn't look at the wine list with that confused half-interest most customers had. He simply appeared in booth 7, slid into the leather seat with the kind of ease that came from someone used to taking space. And when I approached with my notepad, he locked eyes with me and said, "Water, room temperature, no ice." The specificity unnerved me. It was a Thursday night, the restaurant half full with the usual mix of romantic couples and business dinners. Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the marina. I'd been working here long enough to read people in seconds, the wedding ring guy flirting with his coworker, the woman at table 3 mentally calculating the bill, the elderly couple celebrating something quietly sacred. But this man? I couldn't read him at all. He was beautiful in a way that felt like a warning. Dark hair, sharply cut, olive skin, a jawline that could have been carved from something harder than bone. But it was his eyes that stopped me. They were the color of wet concrete, and they held the kind of stillness that made my breath hitch, not the stillness of boredom or exhaustion, the stillness of someone perpetually listening. "Just water?" I asked, pen hovering over my pad. "Just water," he confirmed. His voice was quiet, low. It didn't match the sharp geometry of his face. I should have left it at that. Should have returned to the kitchen, forgotten him within minutes like I forgot most customers. But as I turned away, I felt the weight of his gaze move across my spine like a hand. I delivered the water room temperature, no ice, in a glass that caught the amber restaurant light and moved through the rest of my shift in an odd state of hyper-awareness. I couldn't explain it. He didn't do anything, didn't stare, didn't call me over repeatedly. He simply sat in booth 7, drinking water, and somehow made the entire back half of my evening feel like walking a tightrope. By the time I cleared his table untouched bread plate, empty glass, it was past 11. The rain had intensified. Thunder cracked across the sky, and the lights in the restaurant flickered once, twice, then steadied. "You're off soon," he said. I froze. I hadn't heard him approach. That was the second wrong thing. "How did you changed your shift pattern 3 weeks ago. Thursday nights now. Leaves at 11:30. His tone was conversational, the way someone might comment on the weather. "You wait for the last bus at the corner of 5th and Meridian. You read on the bench under the broken awning." My blood moved through my veins like ice water. I should have been terrified. Part of me was, but there was something else underneath the terror, a current of electricity, thin and dangerous. "Are you following me?" "No." He held my gaze. "Not yet." The restaurant tilted. I could hear the clink of glasses from other tables, the murmur of conversations, the distant sound of rain. Everything felt very far away. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been looking for a certain kind of person." He paused. "For a long time." "What kind of person?" He smiled then. And it was the most frightening thing I'd seen all evening. The kind who can recognize patterns. The kind who notices when things are wrong. His eyes drifted to the corner of the restaurant, where I'd suddenly realized there were cameras I'd never consciously registered before. Then back to me. The kind who sees people, not surfaces. "When I ordered water, you noticed that was odd. Most people wouldn't have. Most people are decorative. You're not decorative." "That's insane," I whispered. "Yes." He stood. He was taller than I'd realized, tall enough that I had to tilt my head back. "My name is Vittorio Russo. And you should decide right now whether you want to know what comes next. Because once you do, there's no walking away from it." The rain intensified outside. Thunder rolled across the sky like something living. "I don't know you," I said, but my voice shook. "No, but you will." He stepped closer, and I could smell him something dark and expensive, like leather and cedar and smoke. "Your name is written in my family records as someone who should never have been left alone. Your grandmother's maiden name was Moretti. Your mother changed it before you were born to protect you, and 3 years ago, you took a job at a restaurant owned by a man named Carlo Russo, my cousin. A test, you might say, to see if you'd notice the pattern." Everything inside me went still, crystalline, impossibly quiet. "My mother's maiden name was Castile," I said automatically, though the moment the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. There was a gap in my childhood, questions my mother had redirected, documents I'd never been allowed to see. "Her married name was Castile," he corrected gently. "Before that, she was Elena Moretti, daughter of Marco Moretti, one of the most powerful men in this city, before the Russo family took everything from him. No. I stepped back, but he didn't follow. He simply watched me with those concrete eyes, patient as a predator. "You're trying to decide if this is real," he said. "If I'm real. If any of this is real." He pulled out his phone, showed me a photograph, a young woman with my nose, my eyes, smiling in front of a house I didn't recognize. "That's your mother. That was taken at her wedding. Before she ran, the rain outside sounded like the world breaking. Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he said quietly, "someone in my family has decided you're leverage, and I've decided you're something else entirely. But I need to know which way you'll break first, toward fear or toward rage, before the people who own the rest of your life figure out that you exist." He placed the phone on the table between us. On the screen, the photo shifted. Now it showed a man dark-haired, with Vittorio's eyes holding a baby. My mother's arm was around his waist. "Your father," Vittorio said. "Dante Russo. He was supposed to marry your mother, bind the families, stop a war." His gaze dropped to my wrist, where I wore a thin silver bracelet my mother had given me when I was 17. A bracelet I'd never thought to question. "He put that on you the day you were born, before your mother ran." The bracelet suddenly felt like iron. "I don't believe you." "I know." He turned toward the door, where the rain continued its assault on the glass. "But you will. By tomorrow morning, you'll have gone through every photograph your mother kept hidden, every document she locked away, and you'll realize that this entire restaurant, this entire neighborhood, has been a very sophisticated cage. One designed not to keep you trapped, but to keep you safe." He paused at the door. "The question, amore, is what you do when you realize the cage is about to break." Then he was gone, dissolving into the rain like something I'd imagined. I stood frozen in the center of the restaurant. The lights flickered again. Once, twice, and in that moment between light and darkness, I felt something shift in the architecture of my life. A crack so small it was almost invisible, but deep enough to let all the darkness through. By tomorrow, I would understand that the man in booth 7 had just shattered the only world I'd ever known. By the next week, I would understand that he was the only person who could protect me from what came after. The photographs were where he said they'd be, hidden beneath the floorboard under my mother's bed, in a house where I'd grown up and slept every night, and never once thought to look for secrets. I found them at 3 a.m., my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. My mother in a wedding dress, not the simple courthouse ceremony I'd been told about, but a full church wedding, with marble columns and candles and flowers. A man beside her with dark hair and Vittorio's eyes. My father, Dante Russo, a name my mother had never spoken aloud in my presence. My father holding me as an infant, his expression fierce and protecting, and absolutely certain. My father dead in a newspaper clipping dated 17 years ago. "Russo hire killed in retaliation," the headline read. "Family war escalates." I went to the bathroom and threw up. When I returned to my mother's room, I found her awake, sitting on the edge of her bed, her face a landscape of caved-in grief. "How much did he tell you?" she whispered. "Enough." My voice sounded like someone else's. "Who is he?" "Vittorio Russo, the one who wasn't supposed to survive." She stood, moved to the window, pulled back the curtain. Outside, the world was still rain-dark, still broken by storm. But in the street below, I could see a car, expensive, black, parked directly in front of our apartment building. "There were 3 brothers," my mother said quietly. "Marco Moretti had me so young, and the Russians, they wanted consolidation, peace. So my father agreed to marry me off to Dante Russo. It was supposed to bind the families together. Instead, it started a war." "Why?" "Because Dante loved me," she said simply. "And his family wanted to control him more than they wanted peace. They thought a married man with a child would be weak, pliable, so they killed him. Made it look like retaliation, but it was a message, an elimination of an inconvenient heir who wouldn't play the game." I thought of Vittorio's stillness, the way he'd moved through the restaurant like something that had already died and come back changed. And Vittorio, the youngest, everyone thought he'd be easy prey after Dante died. Instead, my mother turned to face me, and her eyes held something like recognition. He became something else, something darker. The family that killed his brother made a mistake trying to break him. They broke his conscience instead. A knock on the door interrupted us. Neither of us moved. The knock came again, deliberate, unhurried, not violent, just inevitable. "Don't answer it," my mother said. But I was already moving. I don't know why. Some part of me had known, from the moment I stepped away from booth 7, that this was the only direction left to go. Vittorio stood in the hallway, rain-soaked and beautiful in that terrifying way of his. He'd changed clothes, expensive black suit, tailored to his body, water still dripping from his hair. "You read them," he said. "Yes. Your mother knows you're here." He nodded, accepting this. "Then she knows what happens next, which is, you're in danger." His voice held no dramatic weight, just flat certainty. "The families are in flux. Power is redistributing. Someone in the Cassano organization remembered that you exist, and what you could be worth. Not as leverage for an old war that's finished, but as leverage for a new one. You're the last unclaimed piece on the board. By this time tomorrow, at least 3 people will be trying to find you. And you want to what, protect me? Why would I believe you'd do anything but use me the same way? Because," he said, and something flickered across his face, a moment of true unguardedness. "I've been watching you for 3 years, and if I wanted to use you, I could have done it without introducing myself, without giving you the choice." "What choice?" "Leave with your mother. Disappear. I have the means to make you both vanish completely. New identities, new city, new life." He paused. "Or stay. Let me teach you what you need to know to survive this world that's been hunting you since birth. Let me show you who your father was. Let me teach you the code he lived by, the one my family tried to break and never could. And what do you get out of that?" His eyes moved across my face, like he was reading something written there in a language only he could translate. "Someone who understands what it costs to be loyal. Someone who knows what it means that blood matters not as control, but as responsibility." I thought of the bracelet on my wrist, the weight of it, the way it had felt like iron once I understood what it meant. "If I say yes," I said slowly, "what happens?" "You pack a bag with essentials only. You leave with me tonight. Your mother goes to the safe house in Portland. She'll be protected, and she'll be free. And you..." He stepped closer, and I could smell the rain on him, the darkness of him, something that made my pulse quicken in ways I didn't want to name. "You become what you were always supposed to be. Dangerous, aware, alive in a way most people never touch." And then, his expression shifted, hardened into something more vulnerable. "Then we survive. Together." Lightning cracked outside the window, illuminating his face for one sharp instant. In that flash, I saw something beneath the controlled surface, a need so fundamental it looked like starvation. "My mother won't leave," I said. "No," he agreed. "But she'll stop fighting once she understands you're choosing it freely." I turned back into the apartment. My mother stood in the doorway to her bedroom, tears streaming down her face, nodding slowly as if she'd always known this moment would come. As if she'd been holding her breath for 17 years, waiting for her daughter to step into the space her husband had left behind. "You look like him," she whispered. "Especially when you're angry. Especially when you're afraid, but you won't let it stop you." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Good," she said. "He was too. That's what made him strong." I packed a single bag clothes, my mother's journals, the photographs, the bracelet still burning on my wrist. When I emerged, Vittorio was waiting by the door with the patience of someone who'd been waiting his entire life. "One question," I said. "Always," he replied. "Why me? Specifically? You said you were looking for someone, but there are thousands of people in this city." He studied me for a long moment. "Because," he said quietly, "when I ordered water and told you every secret about your surveillance, you didn't ask me how I knew. You asked me why. You wanted to understand the intention behind the knowledge, not just the knowledge itself. Most people would have run. You wanted to understand." He opened the door to the hallway. "That's what separates the survivors from the dead in this world. The people who want to understand." Rain roared beyond the windows. The city pressed against the glass like something trying to break through, and I walked toward the darkness with a man whose brother had been my father, whose family had destroyed mine, and who was offering me the only dangerous, beautiful, terrible thing anyone had ever offered me: the truth. His apartment was in a building that shouldn't have existed. From the street, it was unremarkable, a converted warehouse in the industrial district. The kind of place that had been gutted and reborn so many times, its original purpose was completely obscured. But once Vittorio keyed us through the reinforced door and into the private elevator, the world shifted. The penthouse was all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like we were floating above it. Rain streaked the glass. The furniture was minimal, expensive, chosen for function rather than decoration. There was a library on one wall, floor to ceiling, with books that looked old and necessary. A kitchen with a marble island. A hallway, I suspected, led to private rooms I wasn't meant to see yet. But what stopped me was the study. Vittorio led me to a room off the main living space, and the moment I stepped inside, the air changed. Changed into something thick and old and holy. The walls were covered in photographs. Not random snapshots, a genealogy of crime and survival stretching back decades. Family trees annotated in what looked like Vittorio's controlled handwriting. Maps of the city with certain neighborhoods highlighted in red, others in blue. A chart that looked like military strategy, but with names instead of units. And in the center of it all, a portrait of my father, Dante Russo, painted in oils. His expression carrying that same terrible beauty I saw in Vittorio's face. But there was something softer in the painting, a capacity for hope that the living version no longer had. He commissioned this 2 months before he died, Vittorio said from behind me. He wanted a record, something beyond the photographs and the documents. He wanted people to remember that he was real, that he existed as something other than a pawn in the family's game. I reached out, my fingers stopping just before touching the canvas. Tell me how he died. Vittorio was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed, stripped of its protective layers, exposing the bone beneath. The family contracted it through intermediaries, so they could claim clean hands. 3 men broke into a hotel room in Milan. He was there with your mother. She was 3 months pregnant. Vittorio's jaw tightened. He told her to hide in the bathroom, locked the door, told the men he'd come quietly if they let her live. They believed him? No, but they executed him anyway. The message was supposed to be about obedience. Instead, it was about waste, about a bloodline that refused to bend, even facing death. I finally looked away from the painting. Vittorio stood in the doorway, his suit still damp from the rain, his hair curling slightly at the edges. He looked young in this light, and impossibly tired the way someone looks when they've been holding their breath for a very long time. Why are you showing me this? Because you need to understand what you're walking into. He moved past me, pulling a book from the shelf, old leather-bound. The pages yellowed. This was his journal. He wrote in it every day. His thoughts about the family, about your mother, about you. He never met you. Not really. You were born the morning he was killed, but in the 3 months he knew about you, he wrote about you constantly. He opened the journal at random, showed me a page in handwriting I recognized from my mother's letters. The same careful loops, the same deliberate spacing. She's perfect. Elena says the baby moves like she's already fighting something, already defiant. I'm afraid of what she'll become in a world where her father is nothing, but I hope that she becomes strong enough to choose her own darkness, rather than have it chosen for her. My throat tightened. He knew? I asked. He knew what kind of world she'd be born into? He knew it better than almost anyone. Vittorio set the journal down gently. That's why he left instructions. Not for you to join the family he hated what the family had become. He left instructions for you to survive it, to understand it, to never be owned by it. And you've been following them? I've been following them for 17 years, he said quietly. Every decision I made in this family, every power I consolidated, every alliance I built, it was all meant to create a space where those instructions could be carried out, where someone like you could exist outside the family structure without being hunted. That didn't work very well. No, he agreed. But it was the best I could do against an entire system designed to destroy you. A sound came from outside, the rain intensifying, or perhaps just the building settling under the weight of what we were discussing. Vittorio moved to the window, and I watched his reflection in the glass, the controlled tension, the capacity for violence held always at a razor edge, the terrible loneliness of someone born into power, but constitutionally incapable of using it the way power demanded. Come here, he said. I did. When I reached him, he pointed to a building in the distance, barely visible through the rain dark. That's the Cassano building. That's where the decision was made to come for you. I have 3 days before they move. 3 days to teach you enough to survive what's coming. 3 days to teach me what, exactly? To shoot? To kill? To become like you? No. He turned to face me, and the distance between us suddenly felt very small. To teach you how to think like the people who will be hunting you, how to lie convincingly enough that they believe you're harmless, how to build allies from people you can't trust, how to survive in the gray spaces where morality exists only as an inconvenience. And why would you do that? Because, he said, and he reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away and touch the bracelet on my wrist. His fingers were warm. You're wearing my family's mark, And my family, broken as it is, has always protected its own. I'm not your own. No, he agreed. His thumb traced the edge of the bracelet, and electricity moved through me like something alive. You're something else entirely, something I wasn't supposed to want. But I've been looking at you for 3 years, and I've been trying very hard not to. It was the most honest thing he'd said all night. The air between us felt like it was vibrating at a frequency only we could hear. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, could feel the rain on the other side of the glass like it was falling inside my chest. What happens if I fail? I asked. If I can't survive this? His hand dropped away from the bracelet. Then I'll make it so fast you won't feel it. I promise you that. It should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like mercy. We should sleep, he said, stepping back. Tomorrow, we start. He showed me to a guest bedroom, pristine, anonymous. Exactly the kind of place designed not to leave a trace of occupancy. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the rain, and tried to remember what it felt like to be ordinary. Tried to remember the person I'd been yesterday, before a man ordered water and offered me the truth, like it was a weapon. But I was beginning to suspect that person had never existed at all, that I'd been born into this darkness, the moment my father locked that bathroom door and walked toward his execution, and that the only thing left was to finally step into it completely. The training started at dawn. Vittorio woke me at 5 a.m., before the city had fully opened its eyes, and led me through the penthouse to a room I hadn't seen the night before. It was equipped like something between a gymnasium and a weapons vault, mirrors along one wall, a heavy bag suspended from the ceiling, shelves containing equipment I recognized from movies, and things I had no name for. First rule, he said, his hair still wet from a shower. Everyone in this world operates on the assumption that you're soft. You look soft. You move soft. You smile soft. That's a weapon if you know how to use it. I don't. You will. He pulled on a pair of gloves, black leather, the kind that professional fighters wore. Show me your hands. I held them out. They were small, pale, with short nails and calluses from years of washing dishes. Good, he said. These are hands that have worked. That's rare in this world. Most people with power were born into it. They have soft hands that have never had to earn anything. Your hands already know what labor is. We just need to teach them how to hurt. For the next 4 hours, he taught me things I hadn't known it was possible to know. How to use leverage instead of strength. How to find the 3 pressure points on a human body that could incapacitate someone regardless of size. How to break a wrist. How to identify when someone was about to become violent by watching the micro movements in their shoulders and jaw. Prediction is everything, he said, guiding my hand to the heavy bag. You can't fight everyone, but you can read everyone. The moment you understand their intention, you've already won. By noon, my arms screamed. By 3 in the afternoon, I could barely grip a water bottle. Good, Vittorio said, watching me with no mercy. Pain teaches you where your limits are. Limits are useful. They tell you what you need to strengthen next. He made me study after that. We moved back to the study with the photograph wall and the journals, and he walked me through the structure of the families, not theoretical, but practical. Who owed money, who had blood debts, which alliances were real, and which were performance. This is the code your father lived by, Vittorio said, pointing to a passage in one of the journals. Never lie about why you're doing something, only about what you're doing. The families are built on deception, but the deception that kills you fastest is lying to yourself about your own motivation. If you're going to hurt someone, understand that you want to hurt them. Don't pretend it's necessity. Own it. That's insane. That's survival. He turned the page. Your father understood it perfectly. That's what made him dangerous, and what made them have to kill him. He was the only person in the Russo family who knew exactly what he wanted, and exactly what it would cost. They couldn't predict him because he wasn't lying to himself. By evening, I was exhausted in a way I'd never experienced. My body ached. My mind felt like it had been wrung out and hung to dry. Vittorio ordered food not from restaurants but from somewhere private, delivered by a man who nodded at Vittorio and asked no questions. We ate in silence. Italian food, rich and heavy. Wine that tasted like dark fruit and memory. Are you afraid? He asked as I pushed pasta around my plate. Terrified. Of what? That I won't be good enough. That they'll come and I'll get you killed trying to protect me. That I'll realize I don't want this and try to leave, and you won't let me. He set his fork down. I would let you leave. No, you wouldn't. You're right, he said, and the honesty of it was almost a relief. I wouldn't. Not because I'd physically stop you, but because after everything you've learned in the past 18 hours, leaving would be suicide, and I'm not sure I'd be able to watch you die. The rain had stopped sometime during the day. Through the windows, the city was visible in painful clarity: buildings, streets, people moving through their ordinary lives, with no idea what was being planned in this room. "Tell me something," I said. "Why did it have to be me? Why did you spend 3 years watching me instead of just reaching out to my mother? She would have let you protect me years ago." "Because," Vittorio said quietly, "your mother carries the weight of loving my brother. Every time she looks at you, she sees his death. You needed to come to this freely knowing what you were choosing, not hidden from it. That's what he would have wanted." "How do you know that?" "Because it's what I would want, if I had a child." The statement hung in the air between us. "Do you?" I asked. "Have a child?" "No." His expression closed off slightly. "The women in my life don't survive long enough for that kind of complication." Before I could respond, Vittorio's phone buzzed. He read the message, and something shifted in his face. A hardness that made the version of him I'd seen in the study look almost soft. "They're moving faster than I predicted," he said quietly. "The Casanos made a move. They bought information. They know you exist. They're going to come after your mother in Portland." "What? How is that possible? You said she was safe." "She is." He was already moving, pulling up security feeds on a wall-mounted monitor. I could see the Portland safe house, a nondescript suburban home, agents positioned at the doors and windows. But they know she exists, which means they're willing to escalate, which means they're more willing to risk direct conflict than I thought they would be. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," he said, his voice dropping into that dangerous register I'd first heard in the restaurant, "that the timeline just compressed. In 3 days, I was going to have you ready. You would have been a ghost story they chased and never caught. Instead," he turned to me, "instead, we need to move forward the most important part of your education, which is making them want to keep you alive more than they want to use you." He stepped closer, and I could smell him again, that dark, expensive scent like leather and smoke. "We need to make them believe you're more valuable as a negotiation than as leverage. We need to make them think you're on their side." "How do we do that?" "The same way your father did it, by telling them a truth so compelling they'll protect you from their own interests." He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear in a gesture so gentle it contradicted everything else about him. "By making you matter to someone so dangerous that hurting you becomes dangerous for them." "And who would that be?" His hand moved to my jawline, tilting my face up toward his. "Me," he said softly. Outside, the city breathed in the darkness. Inside, the space between us contracted down to something infinitely small and impossibly loaded. Tomorrow, people would start dying, but tonight, in the penthouse suspended above everything, Vittorio Russo made the decision that would destroy everything he'd spent 17 years building. He decided to stop pretending he was protecting me. He decided to let himself want me instead. The safe house was in the mountains, 3 hours from the city, hidden on property that officially belonged to a shell corporation Vittorio had owned for 12 years. The drive took place in silence, Vittorio at the wheel of a car so expensive it felt like sitting inside wealth itself. Me in the passenger seat trying to process the fact that we were fleeing. Actually fleeing. The kind of fleeing that suggested immediate danger. The kind that made everything feel like a movie right up until you realized the movie was your actual life. "Why are we here?" I finally asked, as the city dropped away behind us and mountains began to rise ahead. "Because," Vittorio said, his hands steady on the wheel, "the Casanos made their move. They sent people to the restaurant. Questioned Carlo about you. He told them nothing, but the fact that they asked means they're organizing. That means our window is closing." "How long?" "Maybe a week. Maybe less." I watched the city lights disappear in the side mirror. Somewhere in Portland, my mother was being protected by men I'd never met. Somewhere in his empire, Vittorio's family was making decisions about whether to protect me or hand me over to buy peace. "Your family would do it," I said. "Hand me over, I mean, to protect themselves." "Most of them would," he agreed. "The Russo name is old, but it's not what it was. We're in a period of weakness. Someone like you, someone with a legitimate claim to the Moretti line, is a threat to the current power structure. Easier to eliminate the threat than manage it. Why protect me then? Why not just let them have me?" He was quiet for several minutes, the car eating up the highway, the darkness absolute around us. "Because," he finally said, "I've been loyal to a family that's never been loyal to anything but money. I've followed a code of honor with people who treat honor as decoration. And 17 years ago, I made a promise to a dead man that I intend to keep, even if keeping it means going to war. The safe house appeared at midnight, a compound set back from the road, surrounded by dense forest. The kind of place that existed specifically to disappear people. Multi-level, modern, equipped with surveillance systems that made the penthouse look simplistic and utterly isolated. "It's just us?" I asked, as Vittorio keyed us through the main entrance. "For tonight, yes." He set our single bag down on the marble floor of the foyer. "Tomorrow, people start arriving. Specialists. People loyal to me specifically, not to the family. But tonight, you rest. That's non-negotiable." But when I lay in the guest bedroom, another anonymous, perfectly appointed space, I couldn't sleep. I could hear the wind in the trees outside, the absolute silence of the mountains, and beneath it, the sound of my own blood moving through my veins. Around 3 a.m., I gave up. I found Vittorio in the kitchen, making coffee with the kind of meticulous attention most people reserved for ritual. He was wearing only black pants and a dark shirt, sleeves rolled up, and the domesticity of it jarred me. "Can't sleep?" he asked, not turning around. "There's too much happening in my head. That will pass." He poured coffee into 2 cups, black, strong, the kind that made my eyes water. "Or it won't. Depends on whether you want it to pass. Some people in this world become addicted to the adrenaline, to feeling like they're balanced on a knife's edge. Are you one of those people?" "I was," he said, and finally turned to face me. In the kitchen's soft light, I could see the toll the past 18 hours had taken, shadows under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth. But that was when I had nothing to lose. That was when I could afford to want danger. It's different now. Why is it different? He studied me for a long moment, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes, between the parts of him that wanted to protect me and the parts that wanted something entirely different. "Because," he said quietly, "now I have something I don't want to lose." He moved past me, and it required genuine effort not to reach out and touch him as he passed. In the living room, the windows opened onto absolute darkness. Vittorio settled into a leather chair by the fireplace, coffee in hand, and gestured for me to do the same. I sat across from him, close enough that I could have reached across the space between us if I wanted to. "Tell me about your father," he said. "From your mother's perspective. Not the journals, not the official records. What did she tell you about him?" "Almost nothing," I admitted. "She told me he died. She told me he loved us. Beyond that, she didn't talk about him. She was protecting you. From grief, but also from wanting something you couldn't have." He took a slow drink of coffee. "That's a kindness, actually. Most people in this world aren't kind enough for that." "What was he like?" "Not from the journals. Soft," Vittorio said, and something vulnerable crossed his expression. "Softer than he needed to be for what he wanted. He loved your mother in a way that made him stupid. He would have left everything for her, if she'd asked. That's what they killed him for, ultimately. Not because he was dangerous, but because he was capable of wanting something more than power. That kind of man is a threat to people who've already sacrificed everything for power." "And you?" I asked. "What are you capable of wanting?" The silence stretched between us. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, the fire crackled softly, the only thing audible besides the sound of our breathing. "That's the question I've been avoiding for 3 years, he said finally. "The answer used to be nothing. I wanted power, control, stability. I wanted to honor your father's memory by building something that could protect you from a distance. But somewhere in that 3 years, while I was watching you clear tables and read books on a bench under a broken awning, something shifted." "What shifted?" "I stopped being satisfied with protecting you from a distance." I set my coffee down. My hands were shaking slightly, and I didn't want to spill it. "Vittorio, I'm not going to touch you," he said quietly. "Not like that. Not yet. That would be a complication we can't afford right now. But I wanted you to understand that there's a reason I'm willing to risk everything for you. It's not just the code. It's not just your father. It's that you matter to me in a way that people like me don't usually let things matter." I stood up, too restless to sit, and moved to the window. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, a girl who looked like a waitress, who wore her father's bracelet, who had no idea that this morning she'd wake up in a completely different world. "If you're lying to me," I said quietly, "if this is manipulation, then you'll recognize it." Vittorio interrupted. Because I've been teaching you to read people. And you're good at it. You're better at it than most people I know, who've spent a lifetime learning. So if I'm lying, you'll know. I turned back to face him. Am I lying? He asked. I studied him, the controlled tension in his shoulders, the rawness in his eyes, the way his hands gripped the coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping him tethered. No, I said. I don't think you are. Then we have a problem, he said softly. Because I can't afford to want you, and I can't stop wanting you. And in approximately 7 days, people are going to come here who would use that against me. Who would use you against me? Lightning cracked outside the windows. The storm had been building all night, and now it finally broke. So, what do? I asked. We survive, he said. We train, we prepare, and we try very hard not to think about the ways this will go wrong if we're not careful. But we were already careless. I could feel it in the air between us, the beginning of something that didn't care about careful, something that had its own momentum, something that would destroy us both before it was finished. The team arrived on day 3. 5 people, specialists in security, intelligence, finance, and violence. Vittorio had given each of them a name, though I suspected those weren't their real names. They moved through the safe house like ghosts, taking over the command center on the lower level, setting up surveillance equipment that made the penthouse's systems look quaint. One of them, a woman called Iris, took particular interest in me. She was tall, with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of eyes that had seen every version of human deception. She arrived with a suitcase full of documentation, new identities, credit histories, carefully constructed backgrounds for people who needed to disappear. We have 7 options, she told me on day 4, spreading paperwork across the kitchen table. Different countries, different identities, different life trajectories. You need to choose which person you want to be when you leave here. And when is that? I asked, though I already knew the answer. 5 days. Maybe less if the Casanos move faster than expected. She lit a cigarette illegal in the house, but no one dared tell her that and watched me. Has Vittorio talked to you about what happens if this goes wrong? He said he'd make it fast. He would try, Iris said. But that's not actually possible if they catch you. They'll keep you alive as long as you have utility, and that could be a very long time. I've seen people broken in ways that make death look like mercy. Why are you telling me this? Because Vittorio is emotionally compromised, and compromise is the thing that kills people in this line of work. She tapped ash into a saucer. He's trying to save you. That's admirable and stupid. The intelligent thing would be to put you on a plane to Buenos Aires tomorrow and let you live out your life as someone else. Instead, he's preparing for a war that might not even be winnable. Why would he do that? Because he loves your father enough to keep his promise, Iris said, and because he wants you enough to risk everything else. I left the kitchen before Iris could see the effect her words had. That night, I found Vittorio in the command center, surrounded by monitors showing satellite feeds of the city. He looked exhausted. He looked like someone who was slowly coming apart and trying very hard not to show it. Iris thinks you're compromised, I said. Iris is right. He didn't take his eyes off the monitors. I am. Dramatically, dangerously compromised, which is why we need to establish some boundaries. What kind of boundaries? The kind where I stop looking at you the way I've been looking at you, he said quietly. Because if the Casanos see weakness, they'll exploit it. They'll use you to break me, and I can't afford to be broken right now. But even as he said it, he finally looked away from the monitors and turned to face me, and his expression contradicted every word he'd just spoken. We shouldn't be alone together, he continued. Not until this is resolved. It's too much of a risk. Okay. He seemed to expect me to argue. When I didn't, something flickered across his face, disappointment, maybe, or relief. It was hard to tell with him. I mean it, he said. From now on, there's always at least one person with us. I said okay, then why are you still here? But he didn't move. And I didn't leave. We stood in the command center with its walls of monitors and its dozens of eyes watching the city, and the space between us felt smaller than it should have been given that he'd just established a boundary and I'd agreed to it. Tell me something honestly, I said. Is any of this real? The protection, the training, the plan to keep me alive, is it actually possible? Or are you just making promises you can't keep? It's possible, he said. Difficult, uncertain, but possible. And if I get killed anyway? Then I burn the Casano family to the ground and spend the rest of my life making them understand what that costs. The way he said it was so absolute, so free of any irony or exaggeration, that it became real. It became possible. I don't want that, I said. I don't want you to throw away your entire life for me. You don't get to decide that, he said quietly. I threw away my life a long time ago. I've just been going through the motions of living. You're the first thing that's made the motions feel like something real in a very long time. The monitors cast blue light across his face. He looked like a man drowning, and aware of it but choosing not to fight. If we're doing this, I said, if we're actually doing this, then I need to know that I'm not a complication, that I'm not just an obligation left over from my father. You're neither. He stepped closer, and I could feel the controlled violence beneath his skin, the tightness of someone holding themselves back. You're the only clean thing in a very dirty life, and that makes you dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with your bloodline. Are you going to kiss me or keep talking about why you shouldn't? It was a challenge, and he recognized it as such. For a moment, he seemed like he was actually going to walk away, like he was actually going to maintain the boundary he'd just set. Then he reached out and caught my face in his hands with the same careful attention he'd shown to making coffee, and he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't a promise or a beginning. It was a man who had been controlled for 17 years, finally allowing himself one moment of complete loss of control. It was desperate and raw, and it tasted like all the things he couldn't say out loud, want and need, and a kind of hunger that went beyond the physical. When he pulled back, his eyes were closed, and his breathing was ragged. That can't happen again, he said, because it compromises the plan. Because if it happens again, I won't be able to let you go. And letting you go, keeping you free, that's the only clean thing I have left to give. I don't want freedom, I said. I want. He covered my mouth with his hand. Not violently, gently. A command delivered through touch. Don't, he said. Don't tell me what you want. Not right now. Because right now, I still have the capacity to do the right thing. And if you ask me to choose between keeping you alive and keeping you, I'm not sure which way I'll break. He dropped his hand and turned back to the monitors. Go to your room, he said quietly. And tomorrow, we maintain the boundaries, no matter what. I left him there in the blue light, watching a city he controlled and a girl he couldn't protect, and himself slowly coming apart. By morning, he'd made a decision I wouldn't understand until it was far too late to take it back. A decision that would shatter everything. The message came at 6 a.m. Vittorio found me in the kitchen and handed me a phone not his. Some secure device that looked like it had been manufactured specifically for sending untraceable communications. The Moretti family wants to negotiate, the message read. They're willing to make a deal with you directly. No middlemen, just you, them, and a promise. What promise? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. That you align with them, Vittorio said quietly. His face was closed off, utterly unreadable. That you accept your inheritance, your position, your blood. In exchange, they'll protect you from the Casanos. They'll give you power. They'll make you legitimate. And what do you think? I think it's a trap. He took the phone back. But it's also possibly the only way to keep you alive without starting a war my family isn't strong enough to win. We're considering it? I'm considering it, he said. Which means you're not. You're going to stay here. You're going to be safe. And I'm going to meet with them. Absolutely not. I stood up. If you're walking into a trap, I'm not sitting on the sidelines. You are, he said. And his voice had taken on that dangerous quality I'd learned to recognize. You're going to stay in this compound. You're going to listen to everything Iris tells you. And if something happens to me, you're going to get on a plane with a new identity, and you're never going to look back. Vittorio, promise me. No. He crossed the kitchen and cornered me against the counter. Up close, I could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the toll of 17 years of control finally breaking down. Promise me, he repeated. Or I'll have Iris sedate you and lock you in a room for the next 72 hours. I will do that, and I will feel nothing but relief while I do it. Because at least I'll know you're safe. You're not thinking clearly. Exactly. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating off his body. I'm not thinking clearly. I'm thinking with the parts of me that want you to live more than I want to live myself. So I need you to think clearly for both of us. I need you to promise me that you'll survive this. That you'll forget about me if you have to. That you'll become someone new and breathe and laugh and live a life that doesn't have any of this darkness in it. I can't do that. You're going to have to. He kissed me, then brief, fierce, like he was trying to memorize the feeling of my mouth, and then he was gone. He left the safe house in the early afternoon, Iris informed me that he was meeting with the Moretti family in neutral territory, a hotel downtown, protected by both families' security, public enough that open violence would be difficult, but possible, Iris added, watching me with those knowing eyes. Not likely, but possible. I tried to stay occupied. I trained with one of the specialists, a quiet man named Marco, who taught me sequences of movement that would disable someone without leaving evidence. I studied the genealogy of the families until the names blurred together. I did everything I could except think about Vittorio walking into a situation that was almost certainly designed to break him. By 8 in the evening, he hadn't returned. By midnight, the safe house had gone into some version of controlled panic that no one was admitting to. Iris stood in the command center, watching feeds of the hotel, empty hallways, security doing their rounds. Nothing that suggested violence had occurred. But Vittorio's phone had gone silent. His security team couldn't locate him. He'd vanished from the hotel's surveillance system between 6:47 and 6:49 p.m., a gap of exactly 2 minutes. They took him, I said. Probably, Iris agreed. Which doesn't necessarily mean he's dead. The Morettis are making a play for power, and Vittorio is valuable to them alive. He has connections, information, resources. Dead, he's just a complication. So what do? We wait for them to make contact. She lit another illegal cigarette. They'll want something. Money, usually. Or a promise. Or someone to trade for. Her eyes moved to me as she said it. You're not trading me for him, I said. I wasn't planning to. She took a long drag. But Vittorio might have other ideas, if it comes to it. Love makes people stupid in ways that violence never could. I couldn't sit with that statement. I left the command center and found myself in the study, surrounded by books and photographs, and the ghost of the man who had set all of this in motion 17 years ago. My father stared at me from his portrait, his expression still carrying that impossible hope. I pulled his journal from the shelf and opened it at random. The moment you let someone matter more than yourself, you're already lost. But the moment you stop letting anyone matter, you're already dead. The only art is in finding the exact line between those two states where you can still function. I'm not sure I've ever found it. Something cracked open in my chest. I knew, with the kind of clarity that comes from terror, that Vittorio hadn't found that line either, that he'd fallen completely into the first category, love, making him vulnerable, making him a liability, making him someone the Morettis could break. By morning, the contact came. A video, sent to the secure phone. Vittorio, in what looked like a basement, his shirt torn, blood running from a cut above his eye. He wasn't broken, though not yet. He was still upright, still composed, still dangerous, but in the background, barely visible, I could see someone else. My mother. They had found her in Portland. They had extracted her from the safe house. And now they had both of them, and they wanted what they'd always wanted. Me. The message was simple. Surrender myself to them, and they'd let Vittorio and my mother go alive. Walk into a Moretti family compound, alone, and accept my inheritance on their terms. It was impossible. It was also the only option that didn't end with someone I loved, dead. I was packing a bag not to run away, but to prepare for the inevitable when Iris found me. You can't do this, she said flatly. I have to. You'll be dead within a month. They'll use you to consolidate power, and then they'll eliminate the threat. Your father understood this. Vittorio understands this. The only person who doesn't seem to understand it is you. My mother is there, I said. Vittorio is there. I can't leave them. You can, Iris said quietly. And you should, because both of them would rather be dead than watch you be destroyed. I don't care what they'd rather. I'm going. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, at least do it smart. At least use what you've been taught. So I called the number on the video. I made an offer I would surrender myself, but not to them. To my grandmother. To the oldest living Moretti. To the woman who had been running the family from behind the scenes while men like my father and Vittorio fought and died in the streets. It took 3 hours, but they agreed. The meeting was set for noon the next day. A neutral location, not a Moretti compound, but a gallery overlooking the city, owned by someone who existed outside both families. I spent the last night of my old life writing letters I would never send. One to my mother, telling her I forgave her for running, for trying to protect me into ignorance. One to Vittorio, telling him that his promise to my father was now my promise, and I would finish what he'd started. And one to myself, to the girl who had been a waitress last week, who had existed in a space so small and safe that nothing could touch me. A goodbye to her. Because the girl who walked into that gallery tomorrow would be someone entirely different. She would be dangerous. She would be the last Moretti, claiming what had been left to her by blood and sacrifice. She would be the person who finally understood that love and power weren't opposing forces. They were the same thing. And the only art was in knowing which was which. The gallery was white and empty, the kind of art space where absence was the only aesthetic that mattered. My grandmother was waiting for me in the center of the room, flanked by 2 security guards. She was smaller than I expected, 80-something, with silver hair pulled back severely, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than my annual salary had been. She looked at me and smiled. "You're Marco's daughter," she said. "He would have liked to know you." My grandfather, the man who had started it all. "Where's Vittorio?" I asked. "Secure. Waiting to see if you'll cooperate." She gestured to the guards. "Search her." They did, professionally, finding the small knife I'd hidden in my boot. Marco's training, his insistence that I always have access to a weapon. They took it with no comment and stood back. "You're brave," my grandmother said. "Or stupid. It's often difficult to tell the difference in young women." "I'm neither," I said. "I'm practical. You want me alive and compliant. Vittorio needs to know I'm choosing this freely, not being forced. That's the only way he won't spend the rest of his life trying to get me back." She studied me for a long moment. "You're intelligent as well. That's inconvenient. For you or for me? Both." She moved closer, and I could smell her perfume, something expensive, something that had probably been specifically created for her. "Come with me. There's someone you should meet." She led me deeper into the gallery, past empty walls, past rooms that echoed with absence. At the end of a long corridor, there was a viewing room, and through the window of that room, I could see into a separate space. Vittorio was there. He was sitting in a chair, hands bound, blood dried on his face, but his eyes were still sharp. The moment he saw me, they widened, not with relief, but with something that looked like anguish. "He can see you," my grandmother said, "but he can't hear you. And you can see him, but he doesn't know whether you're here of your own volition, or because you were forced." The point was obvious. Vittorio would have to live with uncertainty. Whether I was his salvation or his damnation would remain unknown until I made it clear. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "What I've always wanted," she said. "What every Moretti wants. Power. Legitimacy. Someone to carry the name forward into the next generation, without the blood feuds and the incompetence that's plagued the men of our family." She gestured at Vittorio. "That man is useful but compromised. He's in love, which makes him vulnerable. You, on the other hand, could be so much more than that." "If I align with the Morettis?" "When you align with the Morettis," she corrected. "It's not a question anymore. The only negotiation is about the terms." I looked through the window at Vittorio. He was watching me with an intensity that hurt to feel. "Release him," I said. "And my mother. And in exchange?" "In exchange, I accept my position. I become Moretti. I give you my loyalty, my bloodline, my future children carrying the name. I become the thing you've been waiting for since my father died." "That's quite generous," my grandmother said, "but also incredibly naive. Why would I release the one person who could control you? Once Russo is free, he'll take you away. He'll hide you. He'll spend the rest of his life protecting you from me." She was right. It was naive. But I'd been trained better than that. "No," I said quietly. "He won't. Because I'm not going to let him." I turned to face her fully, and I realized, feeling it move through my body like electricity, that I was no longer afraid. "I understand what you're trying to do," I said. "You want to control me the way the men of your family controlled you. But that stops now. My father died refusing to be controlled. Vittorio has spent his entire life controlling himself, and I'm not going to be controlled by anyone." "Brave words," my grandmother said. "But you're standing in a room with my security, and that man is in another room with different security. What exactly are you planning to do?" "This." I pulled out the second knife, the one Iris had sewn into the lining of my jacket, the one I'd trained to access in under 3 seconds. I moved with the precision Marco had drilled into me 100 times, and I caught the first guard across the throat as he reached for his weapon. He went down without a sound. The second guard was faster, but he wasn't faster than someone who'd spent a week learning how to predict human movement. I sidestepped his grab, used his momentum against him, and drove the knife up under his ribs the way I'd been taught. His blood spattered across the white gallery floor like modern art. My grandmother stared at me with an expression of something like respect. "Your father never would have done that," she said quietly. No, I agreed. But I'm not my father. I dropped the knife and pulled out the phone, the one I'd kept hidden in a place even Iris didn't know about. The one Vittorio had given me before he left the safe house. I pressed the button. Nothing happened visually, but I watched the light in the room where Vittorio was being held flicker, then die. The door he was locked behind would be open now. Vittorio had been explicit about this contingency plan. If anything went wrong at the meeting, the building's systems would reset. He would have 15 seconds before backup power kicked in. 15 seconds to move. "Did you really think," my grandmother asked, with something almost like amusement, "that you could take this family by force?" "No," I said. "I'm taking it by right." I pulled out the documentation I'd had Iris create: genealogies, blood tests, the kind of official proof that would stand up to scrutiny. My legitimate claim to the Moretti line. Unbreakable. I'm calling the council. I'm formally challenging you for leadership of the family, and unless you're willing to execute your only heir in a gallery with no witnesses, you're going to accept that challenge. It was a bluff. A desperate, insane bluff, based on a week of training, and a lot of wishful thinking about traditions I'd only half understood. But my grandmother smiled. "You're definitely Marco's granddaughter," she said. "Which means you're dangerous in ways the council will understand." "Very well. Challenge accepted." Behind me, I heard a sound, quiet, efficient, the kind of sound that meant Vittorio was free and moving. He appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene: the dead guards, my grandmother's composed expression, me standing in the center of a white gallery with blood on my hands. For a moment, his entire expression shifted. The control cracked open completely, revealing something raw beneath. "You killed them," he said. "I did what I had to do." He crossed the space between us and took my face in his hands the way he had in the command center, gentle and desperate. "You're not supposed to be like this," he said. "You're supposed to be free of this." "I was never going to be free of this," I told him. "None of us are. The only choice is whether to be controlled by it or to control it back." Behind us, my grandmother was already on her phone, presumably calling the council. "You understand what happens now?" Vittorio asked. "You're challenging the leadership of one of the most powerful families in this city. You're not going to be a ghost story anymore. You're going to be a target." "I know," I said, "but you taught me to predict movement, to read intention, to understand the difference between control and submission. This isn't what I wanted for you." "I know," I said again, "but it's what I'm choosing anyway." He kissed me then, brief, devastated, final. And in that kiss, I felt him let go of 17 years of control, let go of the promise he'd made to my father, and accept that I had become something that could no longer be protected, something that had to be destroyed or accepted on its own terms. The council met 3 days later. It was held in a private room of a restaurant that existed exclusively for families like ours, the kind of place where blood was negotiated over wine and power was redistributed quietly, without the messy publicity of actual violence. There were 7 of them, the oldest members of the Moretti family, men and women who had survived 50 years of war and betrayal and strategic marriages. They looked at me with the kind of calculation you only see in people who've been deciding other people's fates their entire lives. "You challenge your grandmother for leadership of the family," the eldest said, a man named Salvatore, with eyes like wet stones. "On what grounds?" "Legitimacy," I said. "Her son is dead. Her grandsons are either corrupted or incompetent. She's old, and the family is weakening under her rule. I'm young, I'm smart, and I'm untainted by the compromises that have degraded this family's power." "You're also a woman," another council member said. "The families don't recognize female leadership. The Morettis are about to start," I replied. "Or I'm about to destroy them and let someone else take over." "Your choice." It was reckless. It was precisely the kind of arrogance that should have gotten me killed. But I'd learned something critical over the past week. Confidence is the most powerful weapon in a room full of people who've spent their lives deciding whether other people live or die. Doubt gets you executed. Confidence gets you negotiation. Salvatore smiled slightly. "You've trained with Vittorio Russo," he observed. "That's obvious." "Yes. And yet you're here without him, which suggests either that he's dead, or that you're attempting to demonstrate independence from him. Which is it?" I'd been dreading this question. "He's alive, but we're separated for the duration of the challenge. He shouldn't have any influence over my leadership. And after the challenge, assuming you survive it, that depends on him, on us." Another council member, a woman with surgical scars visible on her throat, leaned forward. "You're in love with him." It wasn't a question. "Yes, and he's in love with you." Yes. That's a liability, she said flatly. The families survive because leadership is based on logic, not emotion. The families are dying, I corrected. Because leadership has been based on fear, not logic. You've all made decisions to minimize your own loss, rather than to maximize the family's gain. I won't do that. You will, Salvatore said with certainty. The moment it costs you something you actually value. That man will be the thing that destroys you, and everyone at this table knows it. Probably, I admitted. But it's my choice to make, not yours. The council conferred among themselves for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. When they turned back to me, Salvatore did the speaking. The challenge is accepted. The trial by combat will happen within the week. If you win, you take control of the family. If you lose... He shrugged. The problem resolves itself. My grandmother, watching from the side of the room where Challenger's family members were supposed to stand, smiled like she was watching a particularly entertaining film. I won the combat trial through intelligence, rather than strength. My opponent was a man named Giuseppe, my grandmother's nephew. A soldier who'd spent decades training in violence. He was bigger, stronger, faster, but he was also predictable. I'd watched him fight 3 times in preparation, studying his patterns, learning the way he always came at you from the left first, the way he favored his right leg when he was tired. After the initial exchanges, I damaged that leg methodically. Not enough to disable him, just enough to shift his weight distribution. Then I used his momentum against him and put him on his back in a way that meant getting up would require a strategy he didn't have in his arsenal. The victory was clean, undeniable. I became the youngest leader of the Moretti family in recorded history. What I didn't become was free. The moment I assumed power, there were requirements. Business to manage, territories to defend, decisions that required my constant attention. My grandmother, rather than being sidelined, became my advisor, someone I couldn't quite trust, someone whose every suggestion came with a hidden agenda. Vittorio was kept at a distance by agreement. It was supposed to be temporary, a way of demonstrating that my leadership wasn't dependent on his protection, that I could govern independently. But weeks turned into months, and the distance became a permanent feature of our existence. We were in the same city. We occasionally saw each other at neutral business meetings, but it was the kind of seeing someone from across a crowded room and knowing that if you looked too long, someone would make a note of it. 3 months into my leadership, I finally violated the agreement. I went to the penthouse alone, late at night, using access codes I'd kept from when I lived there. Vittorio was in the study, looking at the photograph wall, my father's face still there, my own face now intermixed with the family genealogy. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning around. "I know. If anyone finds out, then they find out." I closed the distance between us. "I'm tired of this. I'm tired of pretending I'm not with you. I'm tired of pretending I'm leading a family, while secretly I'm just waiting for something that isn't allowed." He finally turned to face me. "You look different," he said. "Power looks good on you. Power looks lonely." He reached out and took my hand, just held it, like the simplest form of contact was somehow transgressive. "Your grandmother is right," he said quietly. "I am a liability. The families are already questioning your legitimacy because of your connection to me. Every decision you make is seen through the lens of whether Vittorio Russo influenced it. I don't care what the families think. You should," he said. "Because if you don't, you're going to lose everything you fought for. And I can't be the reason for that. So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we choose our moment. That we plan an exit that gives both of us what we need. That we let the families think I've betrayed you, or that you've cut me loose, or whatever story makes them comfortable. And then we disappear. Where? Somewhere neither of them can touch us. Somewhere we're just 2 people, not a Moretti and a Russo, not a legacy and a promise." "You'd leave your family?" "I left my family a long time ago," he said quietly. "The moment I decided to keep you alive instead of let them use you. I've just been pretending to stay for 17 years. I'm done with that performance." He pulled me closer, and I could feel the controlled violence of him, the tightness that came from someone always managing themselves. "But we have to do it right," he continued. "No dramatic escapes, no romance movie moments. We have to burn it down slowly, in a way that makes everyone believe it's strategic. And then one day, you're going to decide you don't want to lead the family anymore. You're going to pass it to someone you trust, and we're going to walk away." "How long?" I asked. "A year, maybe 2. I'm not sure I can wait that long." "You're going to have to," he said. Because the alternative is losing you to the same machinery that killed your father, and I'd rather spend 2 years wanting you from a distance than spend the rest of my life knowing I was the reason they destroyed you. He kissed me then deep, unhurried, carrying all the patience of someone who'd learned to wait. And I realized that love, in his world, wasn't about closeness. It was about the willingness to separate, about the strength to want someone enough to let them go. The explosion happened on a Tuesday. My office at Moretti headquarters went up in what the authorities would later describe as a gas leak, a tragic accident, a building system failure, nothing suspicious. It killed 2 people, both of whom had been selected specifically because their deaths wouldn't matter politically. It destroyed all the records I'd kept on my computer, and it sent a very clear message to anyone paying attention. The young Moretti leader was becoming a liability. My grandmother took the opportunity to suggest that I step down. "You're too young for this responsibility," she said. Over tea in the family compound sitting room, the kind of sitting room where major family decisions were made in soft voices, like we were discussing nothing more significant than the weather. "You've done admirably, but the families are becoming unstable. They're questioning your legitimacy. It would be better if you retired gracefully, perhaps married someone of strategic importance, produced heirs, let the men handle the governance." It was a beautiful coup d'etat, and I accepted it. Within a month, I'd formally ceded leadership to a cousin. I'd selected someone competent but not brilliant, someone who would be loyal to me rather than to his own ambition. I retained title but surrendered authority. I became a figurehead, a ghost, someone who existed in the family structure but had no actual power. The families accepted this. They were comfortable with me as a legacy, as a symbol. They were less comfortable with me actually running anything. Vittorio, meanwhile, had orchestrated his own disappearance. He'd sold his business interests to his cousins at a significant loss. He'd transferred his real estate holdings to family members. He'd systematically removed himself from every position of power and influence he'd held. By the time I stepped down from family leadership, he'd already positioned himself as someone irrelevant to the power structure. Neither of us had spoken about the plan since that night in the penthouse. But 3 months after I ceded leadership, a man named Marco, the same specialist who'd trained me in combat, came to my apartment with a set of documents. New identities, access to money that existed in accounts I'd never heard of. A house, in a city that wasn't this one, that had been purchased in our new names. Everything we needed to disappear. But there was also a letter. "To whoever finds this after," it read in my grandmother's handwriting. "I've decided that power is a young woman's disease. Once you understand it, once you've held it, you can't go back to being ordinary. So I'm giving you permission to stop pretending. My granddaughter has always been stronger than me. Always been smarter. I was young once, and I had a man I wanted more than I wanted to breathe. My family made me choose family instead. I've spent my entire life making sure that choice was worth it. But looking at her, looking at you two, I think it was always a waste. Go, live, be extraordinary in ways that have nothing to do with blood or business. And maybe, somewhere down the line, you'll understand that I let you go not out of weakness, but out of a kind of strength I couldn't afford to have when I was your age. Nonna." I read it 3 times before I understood it. Vittorio was waiting for me at the airport, not in hiding, but in the open, checking luggage like any normal passenger going anywhere normal. He'd cut his hair shorter. He was wearing clothes that didn't look tailored for violence. He looked like a man who was trying very hard to become ordinary. When he saw me, his entire face shifted. "You came," he said simply. "I came." We didn't embrace in the airport. We didn't touch. But I could feel the gravity of him. The way everything in my immediate world seemed to orient around his presence. "We're burning everything," he said, handing me my boarding pass. "The families, the names, the history. As far as they'll know, we died in that explosion at your office. There's a cover-up story already in place. Bodies have been identified. Records have been adjusted. We simply never existed. What happens to the families? They continue. They survive. They probably become stronger now that the internal conflict has been removed." He smiled slightly. "Your grandmother came to me before the explosion. She helped plan it. Not to kill you, she'd made peace with letting you go. But to give us an exit that didn't require betrayal. Why would she do that? Because she understood something finally. That the code your father lived by, the one I've spent my life trying to honor. It isn't about power. It's about the willingness to want something more than you want control." He gestured toward the security line. "After you." We walked through security separately, just to be safe. We boarded the plane separately, but once we were airborne, Once we were past the point where anyone could reasonably intercept us. I found him in a window seat in the back row, alone. I sat down, and he took my hand. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Good," he said. "That means this is real. I have no idea who I'm supposed to be without the family." "Neither do I," he said. "We'll figure it out together." Outside, the city fell away beneath us. I watched it recede, the streets I'd walked, the building where I'd worked, the apartment where I'd lost and found myself in equal measure, all of it getting smaller, becoming irrelevant. "Do you know what your father used to say?" Vittorio asked, his hand still holding mine. "What?" "That the bravest thing a person could do is choose to be ordinary. That choosing to be ordinary in a world designed for extraordinary violence, that's the real code. That's the real strength." "And did he believe that?" "He tried to," Vittorio said. "He failed. He got caught up in the machinery, same as everyone else. But he tried." The plane climbed higher. The city disappeared entirely, swallowed by clouds and altitude and the sheer physics of distance. "So what's the plan?" I asked. "Do we just become normal people? Have normal jobs? Live in a house with a mortgage and a car we pay for?" "I was thinking something like that, yes." He turned to face me, and his expression carried something I'd never seen before: peace. "I was thinking we could try to be happy. See if that's even possible for people like us. See if we can learn to want something that isn't survival or power or legacy. What would that even look like?" "I have no idea," he said honestly. "But I've spent 17 years being careful, being strategic, being loyal to a code I didn't write. I'm tired. I want to try something different, even if it's terrifying. Especially then," he said. He leaned over and kissed me, gentle, careful, like we were doing something illegal that we wanted to savor, like we had infinite time now, because time was the one thing the families couldn't control anymore. When he pulled back, he was smiling. "What?" I asked. "I'm just thinking about how angry your grandmother is going to be when she realizes I actually left." "She gave you permission." "Not really," he said. "She just stopped fighting it. There's a difference. She's going to spend years convincing herself it was all strategic. That letting us go somehow served the family interests. Doesn't it?" I asked. "We're out of the way. No more liability. No more complication." "Probably," he agreed. "But she'll never admit that was the real reason. She'll spend the rest of her life telling herself that she was being merciful to me, being kind to you." "And was she?" He considered this, watching the clouds streak past the window. "Yes," he finally said. "I think, in her way, she was." The plane continued climbing. The world below became abstract lines and colors and patterns that meant nothing from this altitude. We were leaving all of it behind: the violence, the legacy, the weight of names that had been written in blood. What waited ahead was unknown. But for the first time since Vittorio had walked into the restaurant and ordered water, I didn't feel afraid of the unknown. I felt like I was finally home. The house had a porch. It had white railings and a swing that creaked if you sat on it wrong. It had a garden where I was trying unsuccessfully to grow basil, and a kitchen where Vittorio had learned to cook badly from cooking shows on the internet. I was no longer a waitress, and he was no longer a mob boss. I managed a small bookshop downtown. He worked as a consultant for businesses, legitimate businesses that had nothing to do with anything illegal. We lived quietly. We lived safely. We lived in a way that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. But sometimes, when I woke up in the darkness, my heart would race. Sometimes I'd remember the gallery, the blood on my hands, the weight of the decision I'd made. Sometimes I'd look at Vittorio sleeping beside me and feel the phantom weight of all the ways I could lose him. We'd learn to live with those moments without letting them destroy us. My mother visited every other month, and she and Vittorio had developed something like a friendship based on shared understanding of the things we'd escaped. My grandmother had died quietly, in her sleep, 6 months after we disappeared. The family had assumed control passed to my cousin, and the machinery of organized crime continued without us. One afternoon, while I was shelving books at the bookshop, a woman came in. She was tall, with silver hair, and something about her face felt familiar. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, using the voice I used with customers. "I'm looking for a book," she said, "but I'm not sure it exists. It would be about a young woman who disappeared from the city 3 years ago. About the man who helped her escape. About what happens when people choose something other than power." My blood moved through my veins very slowly. "That would be fiction," I said carefully. "Probably," she agreed, "but I'd like to read it anyway, just to know what happens to people like you when they try to be ordinary." She didn't tell me who she was. She didn't have to. I could see it in the careful way she looked at me, the way someone who spent their entire life controlling people studies those they've learned to let go. I don't think the story ends yet, I told her. I don't know what happens to them. Neither do I, she said. But I have faith they'll figure it out. They're survivors. And sometimes the bravest thing survivors can do is learn to live instead of just enduring. She bought a book, nothing related to anything we discussed, and left. That evening, I told Vittorio about the visit. It was her, wasn't it? I asked. Probably, he said, not looking surprised. She wanted to see you, to understand who you became when you weren't being a Moretti, to make sure I hadn't destroyed you by keeping you alive. Did I? Become someone worth being? He set down the book he was reading and pulled me close. You became exactly what your father wanted, he said. Someone who knew the darkness and chose light anyway. Someone who understood power and refused to be consumed by it. Someone capable of loving without needing to control. And you? I'm still trying, he admitted. But you're teaching me. Slowly. Every day that nothing terrible happens. Every day we just exist together. You're teaching me that ordinary is enough. That quiet is enough. That having one person who knows exactly who you are and loves you anyway, that's the only power that matters. Outside, the sun was setting. It painted the world in shades of red and gold, and the kind of beauty that only comes when violence has no place in it. Do you ever regret it? I asked. Leaving? All of it? Never, he said. You? I thought about the girl who had been a waitress, who had existed in a safe, small world where nothing could touch her. I thought about who I'd become since then, someone who'd killed, who'd survived, who'd learned to read the architecture of violence so thoroughly that I could move through it like it was water. And I thought about this moment simple, quiet, unburdened by anything except the weight of love and choice. No, I said. I don't regret it either. He kissed me then, in a house with white railings and a creaking porch swing, in a life that was ordinary and small and entirely ours. And for the first time since my father died, I understood what he'd been trying to build. Not power, not control, not legacy, but this. Quiet. Peace. The kind of extraordinary that nobody would ever notice because it was just two people, trying to love each other through the darkness they'd both survived. That was the code he'd lived by. That was the code I would spend the rest of my life honoring.